welcome. This is Chapter 9, Interviewing Clients in Involuntary Situations, Children, Dyads, and the Mandated Population. So, in our line of work, you are probably going at some point to have some form of a resistant client. Most of us see many or the majority of our clients may be resistant. You will have some of your voluntary clients, but you're going to have a mix of these too at some point. So I want to kind of take a little bit of questions from your assignment and kind of put it into perspective. I know that on a video lecture, it's kind of hard because you can't really answer these questions, but you can think about them at least. Excuse me. So I want you to take a moment to think about what names do professionals sometimes call our resistant clients. They may call them resistant, hostile, angry, disrespectful, intimidating, unmotivated, defensive. I don't know if you've ever heard anyone refer to resistant clients such as these names, or if maybe you yourself have said it as well. I know at some point in my line of field, I have said these things too. You know, I'm working with so-and-so and they're just so resistant and I don't know how to work with them. And I'll try not to get too much on my label soapbox, but if you're using these terms, it's kind of setting the tone for how you're working with them. And, you know, you want to kind of try to stay as you don't want to be biased towards any of this as much as possible. You want to kind of remain neutral so that you can better help your clients. Unfortunately, there are going to be people that are resistant. There are going to be people that are unhappy, angry, hostile, whatever it is. But you just got to keep trying to look forward to the positive time or to when you're working with them and kind of like that light bulb clicks for them and they're like, wow, there is something I want out of being here. So keep moving forward. The definition of a resistant client is feeling forced or pressured into seeing a practitioner. Some examples might be, children being forced by their parents, a person being forced by their probation officer, maybe CUAS is causing them to come to keep their kids or, whatever. Most helping strategies in psychology, counseling, social work, and medicine assume that a client is motivated and seeking help, but we can't always go from that approach because, again, we have this criminal justice population where that's not always the case, or it doesn't even have to be the criminal justice population. In the example I just mentioned above, we have children that might be forced by their parents. So whatever population you're working with that's resistant, they're out there. So they may not be motivated at first. Some other questions that you'll be answering is, how do clients in involuntary situations see our helpfulness? It's usually unwanted, intrusive, or harmful. They may not see us as a helping person. And, do involuntary clients respond well to warmth, genuineness, or empathy? Research says no. However, I disagree with that because I feel that, there was a time where I know I often relate back to my addiction work, but that was my longest span of working in therapy was with the addiction population. And when I was working with drug and alcohol clients, I worked in a very small town where everybody knew everybody, and the drug population was very high. Drugs were constantly going in and out of this little town. It may have been considered a very rough town because of the drugs that were going in and out. There were a lot of deaths, a lot of overdoses, a lot of drug busts, drug raids, all of those things. So you can assume that the majority of my population was involuntary. Very few of my clients were there voluntarily. I did have a few, but most of them had some external motivator as to why they were coming to me. When I first started, I almost got into that mindset where, I wanted to give up because I'm like, this population is just so tough. They don't want to learn. They're very resistant to groups that I'm running with them. They're very resistant to the, work that I'm doing with them. But I kept going. Every day I showed up with the same attitude and same positive motivation, as hard as it was, and I just kept doing what I thought I needed to be doing with these clients. And I was genuine, I was myself, I was bubbly, my personality, I can't contain it. So I was just myself with them. And naturally, I am a very empathetic person. So I think that by being genuine with them and being empathetic with them and trying my best to kind of stay with where they were at that particular moment, I was very successful. I will never forget that I had probably one of my most resistant clients who was there for smoking marijuana. And I had him for about a year. And finally, when he was getting ready to discharge, he looked at me and he said, you're a good person, Miss Stephanie, and you stuck with it. And I think what they were waiting for is that they were waiting for me to give up on them. They were waiting for that change. They were waiting for me to not understand them or not agree with them because the system in their eyes had jaded them. So I personally disagree with that. And I think as you go out into the field, you will kind of get your own experience with that. And I think that, it's important for those who are in the criminal justice field or maybe physician's assistant field, whatever field you're going into, is to kind of keep this open mind. Because if the client is thinking that we're out to get them, of course they're going to keep that thought and they're going to keep that mentality. And I tried so hard to make my clients see that probation officers were not the bad guys. CYS was not the bad guys. Really, they seem like the bad guys because they are the ones that were in the immediate situation. And unfortunately, they were enforcing the rules on the person. But that doesn't mean that they're a bad person. It doesn't mean that they don't understand that they're not real people and they have feelings too. And they do care about seeing you get well. So, kind of off topic, but I feel that, involuntary clients, I think it's a consistency thing. So if you're consistent with them, I think they're going to respond better to you. So I wanted to give you a little bit of personal insight there. I try to add as much of my experiences with clients that I can with you because, you can read everything in a textbook, and I think the textbook is great and it gives you a lot of useful tools, but sometimes we need some of that real life experience too, and that real life stuff can really help us learn more about what we're going through, even though it might have been my experience, but I think it might be helpful to share that with you. So we're not there yet. Do resistant clients admit their problems? Not usually. So the work gets bogged down right at the beginning because they're already, they're not accepting responsibility. Literature has started to be written in the past 10 years about working with these types of clients. So that is something that we'll kind of move forward and we'll be able to look more into research for. Solution building does not focus on client goals and choice as a strategy to increase client compliance. That is not the end game. We're just working to create solutions to problems for the person that we're working with, not for them to be compliant with us. Again, they could be resistant the entire time that they're there. As in my example I gave to you, I worked with this client that was resistant for a year, and then like the day he left, he was like, you weren't so bad. I like this. I got something out of it. So that took an entire year of just constantly showing up and working at it with this particular gentleman, and something clicked. But they're not always, maybe sometimes they just don't always let you know that it's working too. So it's not about compliance. According to the Brief Therapy Center, if we behave as if we have no investment in our client outcomes, the clients tend to do better. I know I told my clients I have no personal ties to your progress and treatment. I still get to go home at night. And unfortunately, I felt that was such a cold statement when I worked with my juveniles in the sex offender facility. However, it worked. I had to tell them that I have no personal ties in whatever outcomes you have, but I'm still going to show up every day and I'm still going to be consistent and we're still going to go at it and we're still going to work on these solutions. So it's something that worked in my experience. If we keep clients in the driver's seat, they tend to do better. So whether it's a voluntary or involuntary client, that seems to be the method that works best. So how do we take a comment like, I am not the one with the problem, or you social workers are all alike, you are just all in it for the money? No, I can't count how many times I've heard that statement. You're in it for the money. Well, I hate to break it to you, but social work profession is not the money-making profession. You can make money and you can be very well and be very successful. However, you're not going to be your Bill Gates or whoever. You're not going to be a millionaire. Unless you find some trick, but if you do, let me know. So I find that you can't take it personally, and I actually joke with my clients when they tell me that, and I kind of joke right back with them and say, "Oh, really? Yeah, that's why I got that, fancy BMW out there." Joke around with them a little bit, and explore behind why they have that view. Well, why do you think I make all of this money, or why do you think I'm just here for the money? What makes you think that I'm not in it to help you? And explore working with that with your person. Accept their position, accept the fact that that's the thought that they're going to have, and move on with it. Ask them more about it, but accept it and move on. So there on page 181 and the top of page 182, there are some questions and responses. And I think there's definitely some excellent ones in there. Listen for who is important to the person. Listen for what is important to the person. Show interest in whatever they want or whomever is important to them. And look for relationships to shift towards, to wanting something else to change, or even wanting something better for themselves. And be alert for exceptions, because we never know when they're going to come out. Do we pay attention to the requirements of whomever sent them? Yes, you have to, but you may keep some of that in the back of your mind. Not knowing responses. Do you think that they would really want you to do that? Might be a question you ask them. What have you thought about doing this? What would it take to change their minds, whoever's sending them? Do you agree with the person who's sending you? Knowing yourself and knowing the person and knowing why they're sending you will be helpful too. I'm only going to mention this, but there are some guidelines for interviewing involuntary clients on page 184 that you could take a look at. The next part is building solutions with children, if you're working with the children population. Most believe that you need special skills in addition to working with children, but this isn't necessarily the case. I know I believed that at one point. I had worked with adults primarily, and then I had chose a job where I would be working with adolescents. And there was no special skill set that I needed to do that. You just had to kind of change your approach and change the way that you're working with them. Most children are going to be involuntary clients too. Most 12-year-olds are not going to call you up and say, "Hey, can I come see you?" At least not that I've worked with. You want to start with the positives and remember that most children have been told all about what they have done wrong prior to getting to your office. They may not have been told about some of their positives or their strengths. When you're working with children, try to get the adults with them as allies. You want them to see them as an ally, not the enemy. These are the people the children will be interacting with, so you will want them to be on the same page as you, because when they go home, they're going to kind of be the person that's helping implement whatever it is that you're working on with them. Get the child's perspective. I can't stress this enough. I mean, if a child feels like they're not being heard, then you're going to have your hands full working with them. And since you're working with the adult of the child, you might get bias on what the adult feels versus what the child's perspective is. So starting on page 191, there are some other tips for working with children that you can review too. I wanted to give you a little bit about that too. The next part of the chapter talks about interviewing dyads. So what is a dyad? A dyad is two people who are in a close relationship. Some examples might be a parent and a child, husband and wife, student and teacher, coworkers, roommates. Any of those would be an example of a dyad. Are they usually equally motivated? No. One of them is probably involuntary. Keep that in mind. Practice with dyads is called conjoint intervention therapy or interviewing. Pay attention to the feelings or tone of the people that you're working with in the dyad. One is often angry and willing to fight it out in your presence, and one might show nonverbals that they understand, and one might set the other one off. So pay attention to the feeling and tone of the session that you're working with. So is it your job to decode the nonverbal cues to understand what is going on? No, that is not your job. Not knowing is easier and works better because you don't want to make it seem like you're teaming up with one or the other. It's their job to clue you into what's going on, just like as if you were working in an individual session. What do you focus on? Do you focus on the nonverbals? Do you focus on the feelings, the content? You focus on the relationship with the person that they're bringing, whoever's there, you focus on their relationship. The main difference between individual practice and practice with dyads is the focus on the relationship. You're still doing all of the same things you would do with an individual, but your focus is more on the relationship. And I feel like I've sounded like a broken record through some of these lecture videos, but relationship is important in individuals too. So it just kind of takes it a step further, I suppose. Is it easy to focus on the relationship when they're kind of batting back and forth with each other? Probably not. And sometimes it might be easy to want to agree with one versus the other, but you don't want to do that. You want to kind of stay open-minded and neutral. So that's where the focus on the relationship comes in. So when they're batting with each other, focus on their relationship rather than who's right or wrong. An example might be right now, things between the two of you seem to be, tense or not going the way that you want them to. So those are some ways that you might be able to kind of accept and acknowledge the fact that they're, batting back and forth with each other. But what are we going to do to fix it? We're going to focus on their relationship. So do you need to get into the details of why one or the other person might be terrible? No, you stay focused on the relationship. So in the video clips that you would have watched with this chapter, Nancy and her son Alex, Insu focused on Alex. Alex was the involuntary member and looked for strains with Alex. So, Alex was an excellent student. Insu based this on the mother's input, and we can ask what they appreciate about the other person and what they're good at. Then does the same with Alex towards mom. So whatever you're doing with one, you want to work with the other too. So why do we start this way? Results in goodwill, more hope that the problems can be worked on, because we're still working from both angles. We're not just siding with one versus the other, and it's giving each person a chance to kind of talk about the other person in a safe place. So they're maybe not bantering back and forth with each other. So what's next after positive feedback? Ask each person what they want to be different and develop a conversation about this. Try to get them to work towards a common goal. And that sums it up. I mean, they're still working on goals too as a relationship. It's just not an individual goal, as we have talked about before. So some highlights back on that video clip that I mentioned. Alex said he was interested just in his mom understanding him, but that wasn't really true. Insu asked if he understands and then what would change. Alex said that her reactions would change. Her reactions a week from now would change. And Insu can then explore the reactions will be, less dishes to wash or other things. The sequence is what do you want and then. That's kind of the process what do you want and then what's going to be the next step. What difference will it make for you? What difference will it make for the other person in the relationship? Problem talk will come up in dyads as well. So same as earlier, turn it to solution talk. You don't want to focus on the problem. There are some good questions on the top of page 203. When they can't work towards a common goal, use scaling questions. Ask each one a scaling question. Ground rule for working with a dyad would be one person speaks at a time. Again, maintain your neutral stance. It's very important, and it's not easy to do. Keep your thoughts and your judgments aside. We've talked earlier in an earlier chapter that the best way to do that is to listen to what each person is saying, and then you won't be so focused on what your thoughts are. One way to notice if you're losing your neutrality, your neutral stance, is your feelings. If your feelings are starting to creep in, then you know that you're not being neutral. How do you manage? You refuse to take sides, refuse to take a position about the issues being thrown out there, and focus on the relationship. Also, as before, act as though you have no interest in the person's outcomes or in the relationship's outcomes. When one person is angry, underneath that is probably pain and probably hurt. So that's what you want to work on, not necessarily the anger. There's going to be disappointment, the wish to be cared about, respected, or valued, and that might be from the other person. There's going to be hate sometimes too. They want to be loved, that wish to be loved. We become upset with those who we care about or we want to care about us, and the people in our lives and the opinions. Blah, blah, blah. We got that tongue tied there. We might become upset with other people's opinions about us. Okay. Good questions in the face of seeming hatred. So what do you know about blank that tells you that things could be better? That's something you could do to challenge the hatred there. When one member refuses to meet, but the other person still wants to meet with the one person that will, and try to work still focusing on that relationship, not necessarily just on the individual basis, but focus on the relationship. You might say, would so-and-so agree that he or she is this if they were here? Kind of working from that perspective. Mandated people, those who are ordered to meet with you by the courts. We've talked a little bit about this. I've incorporated this throughout. So what's different from other involuntary meetings? They're non-negotiable requirements from the courts. They have to be there. They have to see you if they want to fulfill their court requirement. It's important to know what the mandates are for your client. It's important to communicate them clearly and respectfully if you need to. Clarify your role in their life and let them know that you do have to communicate with whoever their referral source is. Be clear about what you know about the person's case. Let them know what you know from the courts. And when you start, it's likely that recent experiences with the system may have them feeling unfair or may have them feeling angry or frustrated. So keep that in mind when you first get started with them. You want to accept whatever they bring to the table as valid. Even if you may know that it's not necessarily true, accept it to be valid and kind of work through it. Maybe not necessarily confronting it or challenging it. Ask for details. Expand your understanding of why they're coming from that perspective. And then the same as anyone else that you work with, find out what the problem is, what the person wants, and explore how to make that happen. Find their exceptions. That is the same across the board, no matter who you are working with. Look for past successes that you can compliment. Peter complimented on Tim. You kept those children, even though it's been difficult for you. You were very determined about keeping them and not allowing them to be moved around like you were. You want something different for your boys than you had. Look for any success that you can find based off of, stuff that they've told you. So look for those past successes. How can you get a cooperative working relationship with a mandated person? Well, by focusing on what is important to the person and what they want. That would be the easiest way to do that. On page 218, there is how to make recommendations to the court that the person opposes, and this is important too. I know I can give you an example of when I worked with, adjudicated juvenile male sex offenders, and there were times that I would go to court and I would have to testify on behalf of my kids. And I, right from the beginning, would always be honest with my kids, and I would tell them from the get-go, I'm going to be upfront with you, and I'm going to be honest. And if I, think that there's a particular behavior that's maybe not going the way that it should be going, and it's something that I'm going to have to report back to your PO or your judge, I'm going to tell you about it. So I would be upfront and honest with them right away so that when we did go to court and they heard me testify, that they weren't completely going to attack me on the way home or be frustrated because it wasn't a surprise to them. I would often, in some cases, when I had a kid, if it was something significant, say, for example, that they had acted out in the facility and I had to report on that, I would tell them, okay, well, we know what happened in this situation. So when we go to court today, I have to talk about it. So be prepared that this is what we're going to talk about. letting them know in advance, I think, made it a little bit easier. Were they still angry? Absolutely. Were they still frustrated? I'm sure. But it made it a little bit easier for them to understand. And hopefully, in turn, it helps them to see, okay, well, I shouldn't be acting in this way. I have to, make a change there. Eventually, hopefully, that can work to your benefit, I suppose. But there's other ways that you can kind of approach that and work on that, and you can check that out on page 218. I think that is about it for this chapter that I wanted to kind of point out or make note of for you. So that is it for this lecture video. Stay tuned for more. Thanks.